It's time to drink water. It's time to drink water.
Is this a sweet treat? Because it looks like a sweet treat and it smells like a sweet treat, so I'm going to try it and just see if it is a sweet treat.
Okay. Lovely. So, there's 4 chapters last. Chapter 5 onward, dagnabbit. Thank you, Yuna. I suppose so. Once this song is over, we will begin. I love that song. Anyway, now we move to here. Now, everything should be set up and ready to go. Now, unfortunately, there will be a power outage tomorrow from 8 to 1. So if there will be a stream, it will be a late one. So I do apologize for that. Alrighty. Everything should be ready. Let us begin. Chapter 5. But I'm only 96. While a trip to the market should be an ordinary, everyday occurrence, Citra found that food shopping with a scythe carried its own basket of crazy. The moment the market doors parted for them, and the three of them stepped in, the dread around them was enough to raise goose flesh on Citra's arms. Nothing so blatant as gasps or screams. People were used to scythes passing through their daily lives. It was silent, but pervasive, as if they had just accidentally strolled onto some theatrical stage and fouled the performance. Citra noticed that, in general, there were 3 types of people. The first type were the deniers. These were the ones who forged on and pretended the scythe wasn't there. It was just a matter of ignoring them. It was actively, willfully denying his presence. It reminded Citra of the way very small children would play hide-and-seek, covering their own eyes to hide, thinking that if they couldn't see you, then you couldn't see them. The second type were the escape artists. These were the people who ran away but tried to make it look like they weren't. They suddenly remembered they forgot to get eggs, or began chasing after a running child that didn't actually exist. One shopper abandoned a cart, mumbling about a wallet he must have left at home. Despite the obvious bulge in his back pocket, he hurried out and didn't come back. The third type were the scythe's pets. These were the ones who went out of their way to engage the scythe and offer him something, with the secret, not so secret hope that he might grant them immunity, or at least glean the person to their right instead of them someday. "Here, Your Honor, take my melon. It's bigger, I insist." Did these people know that such psychopathic behavior would make a scythe want to glean them even more? Not that Citra would want to level a death penalty for such a thing, but if she were given a choice beside some innocent bystander and someone who was being nauseatingly obtuse about their produce, she'd choose the melon giver. There was one shopper who didn't seem to fit the other 3 profiles, a woman who actually seemed pleased to see him. "Ah, good morning, Scythe Faraday," she said as they passed her near the deli counter, then looked at Citra and Rowan, curious. "Your niece and nephew?" "Hardly," he said, with a bit of disdain in his voice for relatives. Citra had no interest in knowing about. "I've taken apprentices." Her eyes widened a bit. "Such a thing!" She said it in a way that made it unclear whether she thought it was a good or bad idea. "Do they have penchant for the work?" "Not the slightest." She nodded. "Well then, I guess it's all right. You know what they say. Have not a hand in the blade with abandon." The scythe smiled. "I hope I can introduce them to your strudel sometime." She nodded at the 2 of them. "Oh, that goes without saying." After she had moved on, Scythe Faraday explained that she was a long-time friend. "She cooks for me from time to time, and she works in the coroner's office. In my line of work, it's always good to have a friend there." "Do you grant her immunity?" Citra asked. Rowan thought the scythe might be indignant at the question, but instead he answered, The Scythe frowns upon those who play favorites, but I found I can grant her immunity on alternate years without raising a red flag. What if another Scythe gleans her during her off years? Then I shall attend her funeral with heartfelt grief, he told them. As they shopped, Citra chose some snacks that the Scythe eyed dubiously. Are these really necessary? He asked. Is anything really necessary? Citra responded. Rowan found it amusing how Citra gave the Scythe attitude, but it worked. He let her keep the chips. Rowan tried to be more practical, picking out staples like eggs, flour, and various proteins and side dishes to go with them. Don't get the chickenoid tenders, Citra said, looking at his choices. Trust me, my mother's a food synthesis engineer. That stuff's not actual chicken. They grow it in a petri dish. Rowan held up another bag of frozen protein. How about this? Sea steak? Sure, if you like plankton pressed into meat shapes. Well then, maybe you should pick your own meals instead of grabbing sweets and snacks. Are you always this boring? She asked. Didn't he say we have to live as he lives? I don't think cookie dough ice cream is part of his lifestyle. She sneered at him, but switched out the flavor for vanilla. As they continued to shop, it was Citra who first noticed two suspicious-looking teens who seemed to be tracking them through the store, lingering behind them, trying to look like they were just shopping. They were probably unsavories, people who found enjoyment in activities that bordered on the fringe of the law. Sometimes unsavories actually broke the law in minor ways, although most lost interest eventually, because they were always caught by the Thunderhead and reprimanded by peace officers. The more troublesome offenders were tweaked with shock nanites in their blood, just powerful enough to deter any scoffing of the law. And if that didn't work, you got your own personal peace officer 24/7. Citra had an uncle like that. He called his officer his guardian angel, and he eventually married her. She tugged on Rowan's sleeve, bringing the unsavories to his attention, but not to Scythe Faraday's. Why do you think they're following us? They probably think there's going to be a gleaning and they want to watch, suggested Rowan, which seemed a likely theory. As it turned out, however, they had other motives. As the three of them waited in the checkout line, one of the unsavories grabbed Scythe Faraday's hand and kissed his ring before they could stop him. The ring began to glow red, indicating his immunity. Ha! Said the unsavory, puffing up at his strategic triumph. I've got immunity for a year, and you can't undo it! I know the rules! Scythe Faraday was unfazed. Yes, good for you, he said. You have 365 days of immunity. And then looking him in the eye said, and I'll be seeing you on day 366. Suddenly the teen's smug expression dropped, as if all the muscles that held his face up failed. He stuttered a bit, and his friend pulled him away. They ran outside the store as fast as they could. Well played, said another man in line. He offered to pay for the Scythe's groceries, which was pointless, because Scythes got their groceries for free anyway. Will you really track him down a year from now? Rowan asked. The Scythe grabbed a roll of breath mints from beneath the rack. Not worth my time. Besides, I've already meted out his punishment. He'll be worried about being gleaned all year. A lesson for both of you. A Scythe doesn't have to follow through on a threat for it to be effective. Then, a minute later, as they were loading the grocery bags into a public car, the Scythe looked across the parking lot. There, he said. Do you see that woman? The one who just dropped her purse? Yeah, said Rowan. Scythe Faraday pulled out his phone, aimed the camera at the woman, and in an instant information about her began to scroll on screen. Naturally 96 years of age, physically 34, mother of 9, data management technician for a small shipping company. She's off to work after she puts away her groceries, the Scythe told them. This afternoon, we will go to her place of business and glean her. Citra drew in an audible breath. Not quite a gasp, but close. Rowan focused his own breathing so he didn't telegraph his emotions the way Citra had. Why? He asked. Why her? The Scythe gave him a cool look. Why not her? You had a reason for gleaning Cole Whitlock. Who? Citra asked. A kid I knew at school, when I first met our honorable Scythe here. Faraday sighed. Fatalities in parking lots made up 1.25% of all accidental deaths during the last age of mortality. Last night I decided I would choose today's subject from a parking lot. So all this time, while we were shopping, you knew it would end with this, Rowan said.
Callie? No.
I feel bad for you, said Citra. Even when you're food shopping, death is hiding right behind the milk. It never hides, the Scythe told them with a wood weariness. It was hard to describe. Nor does it sleep. You'll learn that soon enough. But it wasn't something either of them were eager to learn. That afternoon, just as the Scythe had said, they went to the shipping company where the woman worked, and they watched, just as Rowan had watched coals gleaning, but today it was a little more than mere observation. I have chosen for you a life-terminating pill, Scythe Faraday told the speechless, tremulous woman. He reached into his robe and produced a small pill in a little glass vial. It will not activate until you bite it, so you can choose the moment. You need not swallow, just bite it. Death will be instantaneous and painless. Her head shook like a bobblehead doll. May I call my children? Scythe Faraday sadly shook his head. No, I'm sorry, but we shall pass any message you have on to them. What would it hurt to allow her to say goodbye? Citra asked. He put up his hand to silence her, and handed the woman a pen and a piece of paper. Say all that you need to say in a letter. I promise we shall deliver it. They waited outside her office. Scythe Faraday seemed to have infinite patience. What if she opens up a window and decides to splat? Rowan asked. Then her life will end on schedule. It would be a more unpleasant choice, but the ultimate result is the same. The woman didn't choose to splat. Instead, she let them back into the room, politely handed the envelope to Scythe Faraday, and sat down at her desk. I'm ready. Then Scythe Faraday did something they didn't expect. He turned to Rowan and handed him the vial. Please place the pill in Miss Becker's mouth. Who, me? Scythe Faraday didn't answer. He simply held the vial out, waiting for Rowan to take it. Rowan knew he wasn't officially performing the gleaning, but to be an intermediary, the thought was debilitating. He swallowed, tasting bitterness as if the pill were in his own mouth. He refused to take it. Scythe Faraday gave him a moment, then turned to Citra. You then. Citra just shook her head. Scythe Faraday smiled. Very good, he told them. I was testing you. I would not have been pleased if either of you were eager to administer death. At the word death, the woman took a shuddering breath. Scythe Faraday opened the vial and carefully removed the pill. It was triangular with a dark green coating. Who knew death could arrive so small? But I'm only 96, the woman said. We know, the Scythe told her. Now please, open your mouth. Remember, it's not to swallow. You must bite it. She opened her mouth as she was told, and Scythe Faraday placed the pill on her tongue. She closed her mouth, but didn't bite it right away. She looked at each of them in turn. Rowan, then Citra, then finally settled her gaze on Scythe Faraday. Then the slightest crunch, and she went limp. Simple as that, but not so simple at all. Citra's eyes were moist. She pressed her lips together, as much as Rowan tried to control his emotions. His breath came out uneasy as he felt lightheaded. And then Scythe Faraday turned to Citra. Check for a pulse, please. Who, me? The Scythe was patient. He didn't ask again. The man never asked a thing twice. When she continued to hesitate, he finally said, This time it's not a test. I actually want you to confirm for me that there is no pulse. Citra reached a hand up to the woman's neck. Other side, the Scythe told her. She pressed her fingers to the woman's caudal artery just beneath her ear. No pulse. Satisfied, Scythe Faraday stood. So that's it? Citra asked. What were you expecting? Said Rowan. A choir of angels? Citra threw him a half-hearted glare. But I mean, it's so uneventful. Rowan knew just what she meant. Rowan had experienced the electrical jolt that had taken his schoolmate's life. It was awful, but somehow this was worse. What now? Do we just leave her like this? Best not to linger, Scythe Faraday said, tapping something out on his phone. I've notified the coroner to come collect Miss Becker's body. Then he took the letter she had written and slipped it into one of the many pockets on his robe. You two shall present the letter to her family at the funeral. Wait, said Citra. We're going to her funeral? I thought you said it was best not to linger, said Rowan. Lingering and paying respects are two different things. I attend the funerals of all the people I glean. Is that a Scythe rule? Rowan asked, never having been to a funeral. No, it's my rule, he told them. It's called common decency. Then they left. Rowan and Citra both avoided eye contact with the dead woman's co-workers. This, both of them realized, was their first initiation rite. This was the moment their apprenticeship had truly begun. Part 2. No laws beyond these. The Scythe Commandments. 1. Thou shalt kill. 2. Thou shalt kill with no bias, bigotry, or malice afterthought. 3. Thou shalt grant an annum of immunity to the beloved of those who accept your coming, and to any else you deem worthy. 4. Thou shalt kill the beloved of those who resist. 5. Thou shalt serve humanity for the full span of thy days, and thy family shall have immunity as recompense for as long as you live. 6. Thou shalt lead an exemplary life in word and deed, and keep a journal of each and every day. 7. Thou shalt kill no scythe beyond thyself. 8. Thou shalt claim no earthly possessions save thy robes, ring, and journal. 9. Thou shalt neither have spouse nor spawn. 10. Thou shalt be beholden to no laws beyond these. Once a year I fast and ponder the commandments. In truth, I ponder them daily, but once a year I allow them to be my sole sustenance. There is genius in their simplicity. Before the Thunderhead, governments had continuous and massive tomes of laws. Yet even then, they were forever debated and challenged and manipulated. Wars were fought over the different interpretations of the same doctrine. When I was much more naive, I thought that the simplicity of the Scythe Commandments made them impervious to scrutiny. From whatever angle you approach them, they look the same. Over my many years, I've been both bemused and horrified by how malleable and elastic they can be. The things we scythes attempt to justify, the things that we excuse. In my early days, there were several scythes still alive who were present when the commandments were formed. Now none remain, all having invoked commandment number 7. I wish I would have asked them how the commandments came about. What led to each one? How did they decide upon the wording? Were there any that were jettisoned before the final 10 were written in stone? And why number 10? Of all the commandments, number 10 gives me the greatest pause for thought. For to put oneself above all other laws is fundamentally a recipe for disaster. From the Gleaning Journal of 8 Honorable Scythe Curie. Chapter 6. An Elegy of Scythes. The flight was on time, as usual. While weather couldn't entirely be controlled, it was easily diverted away from airports and out of flight paths. Most airlines boasted 99.9% on-time service. It was a full flight, but with the lavishly appointed seats of modern air travel, it didn't feel very crowded at all. These days flying was as comfortable as sitting in one's own living room, with the added perk of live entertainment. String quartets and vocal stylists soared across the skies with a cabin full of content passengers. Air travel these days was far more civilized than in the age of mortality. It was now an exceptionally pleasant way to reach one's destination. However, today the passengers of Big Sky Air Flight 922 were on their way to a different destination than the one on which they had planned. The businessman was seated comfortably in seat 15C, an aisle seat. He always requested that seat, not out of superstition, but out of habit. When he didn't get 15C, he was cranky and resentful of whoever did. The company he ran, which was developing hibernation technology, would someday make the longest journey seem to pass in a matter of minutes. But for now, he would be happy with Big Sky Air, as long as he got seat 15C. People were still filing on, taking their seats. He eyed the passengers moving down the aisle with mild disinterest, but only to make sure they didn't hit his shoulder with their purses and carry-ons as they passed. "Are you heading out or heading home?" asked the woman sitting beside him in 15A. There was no 15B. The concept of the B seat, which had once had to sit between two other passengers, had been eliminated long before with unpleasant things like disease and government. "Out," he told her. "And you?" "Home," she told him with a heavy but relieved sigh. At 5 minutes to departure, a commotion up front caught his attention. A Scythe had entered the plane and was talking to a flight attendant. When a Scythe wants to travel, any seat is fair game. The Scythe could displace a passenger, forcing them to take a different seat, or even a different flight if there were no other available seats. More unnerving, however, were tales of Scythes who gleaned the passenger from the seat they took. The businessman could only hope that this particular Scythe didn't have his sights on seat 15C. The Scythe's robes were unusual. Royal blue speckled with glittering jewels that appeared to be diamonds. Rather ostentatious for a Scythe. The businessman didn't know what to make of it. The age the Scythe presented was late 30s, although that meant nothing. No one looked their true age anymore. He could have been anywhere from 30-something to 230-something. His hair was dark and well-groomed. His eyes were invasive. The businessman tried not to catch his gaze as the Scythe looked down the aisle into the cabin. Then 3 more Scythes appeared behind the first. They were younger, perhaps in their early 20s. Their robes, each in a different bright color, were also decorated with gems. There was a dark-haired woman in apple green speckled with emeralds, a man in orange speckled with rubies, and another man in yellow speckled with golden citrines. What was the collective word for a group of Scythes? An elegy, was it? Odd that there be a word for something so rare. In his experience, Scythes were always solitary, never traveling together. A flight attendant greeted the elegy of Scythes, and then the second they were past her, she turned, left the plans, and ran down the jetway.
Callie?
She's escaping, thought the businessman. But then he banished the thought. She couldn't be. She was probably just hurrying to let the gate know of the added passengers. That's all. She couldn't be panicking. Flight attendants were trained not to panic. But then the remaining flight attendants closed the door, and the look on their faces were anything but reassuring. The passengers began to talking to one another, mumbling, a little bit of nervous laughter. Then the lead Scythe addressed the passengers. "Your attention, please," he said with an unnerving smile. "I regret to inform you that this entire flight has been selected for gleaning." The businessman heard it, but his brain told him that he could not have possibly heard correctly. Or maybe this was Scythe humor, if such a thing existed. This entire flight has been selected for gleaning? That couldn't be possible. It couldn't be allowed, could it? In a few moments, passengers began to wrap their minds around what the Scythe had said. Then came the gasps, the wails, the whimpers, and finally, uncontrolled sobs. The misery could not have been worse if they had lost an engine in flight, as planes did back in mortal days when technology occasionally failed. The businessman was a quick study and excelled at split-second decisions in crisis. He knew what he had to do. Perhaps others were thinking the same thing, but he was the one who took action first. He left his seat and hurled himself down the aisle toward the back of the plane. Others followed him, but he was the first to the back door. He quickly scanned its operation, then pulled the red lever and swung the door open into a bright, sunny morning. A jump from this height to the turmeric might have broken a bone or twisted an ankle, but the healing nanites in his blood would quickly release opiates and deaden the pain. He'd be able to escape in spite of an injury, but before he could leap, he heard the lead Scythe say, "I suggest you all return to your seats if you value the lives of your loved ones." It was standard procedure for Scythes to glean the families of those who resist or run from being gleaned. Familial gleanings was a remarkable deterrent, but this was a full plane. If he jumped and ran, how would they know who he was? As if reading his mind, the lead Scythe said, "We have the manifest from this plane. We know the names of everyone on board, including the name of the flight attendant who displayed cowardice unbecoming to her position and left. Her entire family will pay the price, along with her." The businessman slid down to his knees and put his head in his hands. A man behind him pushed past and jumped anyway. He hit the ground and ran, more worried about what was happening in the moment than what might happen tomorrow. Perhaps he had no family he cared about, or perhaps he'd rather the journey with him into oblivion. But as for the businessman, he could not bear the thought of his wife and children gleaned because of him. "Gleaning is necessary," he told himself. "Everyone knows. Everyone has agreed this is a cruel necessity. Who was he to go against it? It only seemed terrible now that he was the one lined up in the cold crosshairs of death." The lead Scythe raised an arm and pointed at him. His fingernails seemed just the slightest bit too long. "You," he said. "The bold one. Come here." Others in the aisle stepped aside, and the businessman found himself moving forward. He couldn't even feel his legs doing it. It was as if the Scythe were pulling him with an invisible string. His presence was that commanding. "We should glean him first," said the blonde, brutish Scythe in a bright orange robe, wielding what appeared to be a flamethrower. "Glean him first to set an example." But the lead Scythe shook his head. "First of all, put that thing away. We will not be playing with fire on a plane. Secondly, setting an example presupposes that someone will be left to learn from it. It's pointless when there's no one left to set an example for." He lowered his weapon and looked down, chastised. The other two Scythes remained silent. "You were so quick to leave your seat," the lead Scythe said to the businessman. "Clearly you're the alpha of this plane, and as alpha I will allow you to choose the order in which these good folks shall be gleaned. You can be last if you choose, but you must first select the order of the others." I... Come now, no indecisiveness. You were decisive enough when you ran to the back of the plane. Bring that formidable will to bear on this moment. Clearly the Scythe was enjoying this. He shouldn't enjoy it. That was one of the basic precepts of Scythedom. A random part in his mind thought, "I should lodge a complaint," which he realized would be very difficult to do if he was dead. He looked to the terrified people around him. Now they were terrified of him. He was the enemy now, too. "We're waiting," said the woman in green, impatient to begin. "How?" the man asked, trying to control his breathing, stalling for time. "How will you glean us?" The lead Scythe pulled back a fold of his robe to display an entire collection of weapons neatly concealed beneath. Knives of various lengths, guns, other objects that the man didn't even recognize.
Callie.
"Our method will be as our mood suits us. Sans incendiary devices, of course. Now please start choosing people so we may begin." The female Scythe tightened her grip on the handle of a machete and brought her dark hair back with a free hand. Did she actually just lick her lips? This would not be a gleaning. It would be a bloodbath. And the businessman realized he wanted no part of it. Yes, his fate was sealed. Nothing could change that. Which meant he didn't have to play the Scythe's twisted game. Suddenly, he found himself supplementing his fear, rising to a place where he could look the Scythe in his dark eyes, the same deep shade of blue as his robe. "No," the man said. "I will not choose, and I will not give you the pleasure of watching me squirm." Then he turned to the other passengers. "I advise everyone here to end your own lives before the Scythes get their hands on you. They take too much pleasure in it. They don't deserve their rank any more than they deserve the honor of gleaning you." The lead Scythe glared at him, but only for a moment. Then he turned to his three compatriots. "Begin," he ordered. The others drew weapons and began the awful gleaning. I am your completion, the lead Scythe said loudly to the dying. I am the last word your lives well lived. Give thanks, and thus farewell. The lead Scythe pulled out his own blade, but the businessman was ready. The moment the blade was drawn, he thrust himself forward onto it. A final, willful act, making death his own choice, rather than the Scythe's. Denying the Scythe, if not his method, then his madness. In my early years, I wondered why it was so rare to catch a Scythe out of his or her robes, and in common street clothes. It's a rule in some places, but not in Mid-America. Here it is just an accepted practice, although rarely violated. Then, as I settled in, it occurred to me why we must be, for our own peace of mind, we Scythes must retain a certain level of separation from the rest of humanity. Even in the privacy of my own home, I find myself wearing only the simple lavender frock that I wear beneath my robes. Some would call this behavior aloof. I suppose on some level it is, but for me it's more the need to remind myself that I am other. Certainly most uninformed positions allow their wearers to have a separate life. Peace officers and firefighters, for instance, are only partially defined by their job. In the off hours they wear jeans and t-shirts. They have barbecues for neighbors and coach their children in sports. But to be a Scythe means you are a Scythe every hour of every day. It defines you to the core of your being, and only in dreams is one free of the yoke. Yet even in dreams, I often find myself gleaning. From the Gleaning Journal of Honorable Scythe Curie. Shut yo stupid bot self up. During your year with me, Scythe Faraday told Rowan and Citra. Chapter 7, Killcraft. You will learn the proper way to wield various blades. You will become marksmen in more than a dozen types of firearms. You will have a working knowledge of toxology, and you will train in the deadliest of martial arts. You will not become masters in these things. That takes many years. But you will have the basic skills upon which they will build. Skills that will be useless for the one you don't choose, Citra pointed out. Nothing we learn is useless, he told her. While the Scythe's home was modest and unadorned, it had one impressive feature, the weapons den. It had once been the garage of the old house, but now was lined with the Scythe's extensive weapons collection. One wall was hung with blades, another firearms. A third wall looked like a pharmacist's shelf, and the fourth wall held more archaic objects. Elaborately carved bows, a quiver of obsidian-tipped arrows, frighteningly muscular crossbows, even a mace, although it was hard for them to imagine Scythe Faraday taking someone out with a mace. The fourth wall was more of a museum, they supposed, but the fact that they weren't sure was unsettling. The daily regime was rigorous. Rowan and Citra trained with blades and staves, sparring against the Scythe, who was surprisingly strong and limber for a man of his apparent age. They learned to shoot at a special firing range for Scythes and apprentices, where weapons that were banned for public use were not only allowed, but encouraged. They learned the basics of Black Widow Katar, a deadly version of the ancient Cambodian martial art developed specifically for the Scythedom. It left them exhausted, but stronger than either of them had ever been. Physical training, however, was only half the regimen. There was an old oak tree in the center of the weapons den. Old oak tree table in the center of the den, clearly a relic from the Age of Mortality. This is where Scythe Faraday spent several hours a day schooling them in the ways of a scythe. Studies in mental acuity, history, and the chemical of poisons, as well as daily entries into their apprentice journals. There was more to learn about death than either of them had ever considered. History, chemistry, writing? This is like school, Rowan grumbled to Citra, because he wouldn't dare complain to Scythe Faraday. And then there was the gleaning. Each scythe must perform a quota of 260 gleanings per year, Scythe Faraday told them, which averages to 5 per week. So you get weekends off, joked Rowan, trying to add a little nervous levity to the discussion. But Faraday was not amused. For him, nothing about gleaning was a laughing matter. On days I don't glean, I attend funerals and do research for future gleanings. Scythes, or should I say good scythes, don't often have days off. The idea that not all scythes were good was something neither Rowan nor Citra had even considered. It was widely accepted that scythes adhered to the highest moral and ethical standards. They were wise in their dealings and fair in their choices. Even the ones who sought celebrity were seen to deserve it. The idea that some scythes might not be as honorable as Scythe Faraday did not sit well with either of his new apprentices. The raw shock of gleaning never left Citra. Although Scythe Faraday had not, since the first day, asked them to be part of the life-taking hand, being an accomplice was difficult enough. Each untimely end came draped in its own shroud of dread, like a reoccurring nightmare that never lost its potency. She had thought she would grow numb, that she would become used to the work, but it didn't happen. It means I chose wisely, Scythe Faraday told her. If you do not cry yourself to sleep on a regular basis, you are not compassionate enough to be a scythe. She doubted Rowan cried himself to sleep. He was the type of kid who kept his emotions very much to himself. She couldn't read him. He was opaque, and it bothered her. Or perhaps he was so transparent that seeing through him to the other side. She couldn't be sure. They quickly learned that Scythe Faraday was very creative in his gleaning methods. He never repeated the exact same method twice. But aren't there scythes who are ritualistic in their work? Citra asked him, performing each gleaning exactly the same. Yes, but we must each find our own way, he told her. Our own code of conduct. I prefer to see each person I glean as an individual deserving of an end that is unique. He outlined for them the 7 basic methods of killcraft. Most common are the 3 Bs, blade, bullet, and blunt force. The next 3 are asphyxiation, poison, and catastrophic induction, such as electrocution or fire. Though I find fire a horrific way to glean and would never use it. The final method is weaponless force, which is why we train you in Bakhtar. To be a scythe, he explained, meant that one had to be well-versed in all methods. Citra realized that being well-versed meant she would have to participate in various types of gleanings. Would he have her pull the trigger? Thrust the knife? Swing the club? She wanted to believe she wasn't capable of it. She desperately wanted to believe that she wasn't scythe material. It was the first time in her life that she aspired to fail. Rowan's feelings on the matter were mixed. He found that Scythe Faraday's moral imperative and ethical high ground infused Rowan with purpose, but only in the Scythe's presence. When left to his own thoughts, Rowan doubted everything. Burned into his mind was the look on that woman's face as she fearfully, yet obediently opened her mouth to be poisoned. The look on her face the moment before she bit down. I am an accomplice to the world's oldest crime, he told himself in his loneliest moments, and it will only get worse. While the journals of Scythes were public record, an apprentice still had the luxury of privacy. Scythe Faraday gave Rowan and Citra pale leather-bound volumes of rough edge-patched parchment. To Rowan, it looked like a relic from the Dark Ages. He wouldn't have been surprised if Faraday had given them a feather quill to go with it. Mercifully, however, they were allowed to use normal writing utensils. A Scythe's journal is traditionally made of lambskin parchment and kid's leather. I assume you mean kid as in goat, Rowan said, and not kid as in kid. That finally made the Scythe laugh. Citra seemed to be annoyed that he had made Faraday laugh, as if it put him at a point ahead of her. Rowan knew that as much as she hated the idea of being a Scythe, she would jockey for position over him, because that's how she was hardwired. Competition was in her very nature. She couldn't help herself. Rowan was much better at picking his battles. He could compete when necessary, but rarely got caught up in petty one-upmanship. He wondered if that would give him an advantage over Citra. He wondered if he even wanted one. Being a Scythe would not have been his life choice. He had not made any life choices yet, so he had no real clue what he would do with his eternal future. But now that he was being mentored by a Scythe, he began to feel he might have the mettle to be one. If Scythe Faraday had selected him as morally capable for the job, perhaps he was. As for the journal, Rowan hated it. In a large family where no one particularly cared to hear his thoughts on anything, he had never really become accustomed to giving his thoughts out for free. I don't see what the big deal is, Citra said as they worked in their journals after dinner one evening. No one will ever read it but you. So why write it? Rowan snapped back. Citra sighed as if talking to a child. It's to prepare you for writing an official Scythe's journal. Whichever one of us gets the ring will be legally obligated by Commandment 6 to keep a journal every day of our lives. Which I'm sure no one will read, added Rowan. But people could read it. The Scythe archive is open to everyone. Yeah, said Rowan. Like the Thunderhead, people can read anything, but no one does. All they do is play games and watch cat holograms. Citra shrugged. All the more reason not to worry about writing one. If it's lost among a gazillion pages, you can write your grocery list and what you ate for breakfast. No one will care. But Rowan cared. If he was going to put pen to paper, if he was going to do what a Scythe does, he would do it right, or not at all. And so far, as he looked at his painfully blank page, he was leaning toward not at all. He watched Citra as she wrote, completely absorbed in her journal. From where he sat, he couldn't read what she was writing, but he could tell it was fine penmanship. It figures she would take penmanship in school. It was one of those classes people took just to be superior, like Latin. He supposed he'd have to learn to write in cursive as he became a Scythe, but right now, he'd be stuck with inelegant, sloppy printing. He wondered, had Citra and he been in the same school? Would they have gotten along? They probably wouldn't have even known each other. She was the type of girl who participates, and Rowan was the kind of kid who avoided. Their circles were about as far from intercepting as Jupiter and Mars in the right sky. Now, however, they had been pulled into convergence. What's up, Lightning? They were not exactly friends, and were never given the opportunity to develop a friendship before being thrust into apprenticeship together. They were partners, they were adversaries, and Rowan found it increasingly hard to parse his feelings about her. All he knew was that he liked watching her write. Scythe Faraday was strict on his no-family policy. It is ill-advised for you to have contact with your family during your apprenticeship. It was difficult for Citra. She missed her parents, but more than that, she missed her brother Ben, which surprised her, because at home she'd never had much patience for him. Rowan seemed to have no problem being separated from his family. They'd much rather have their immunity than have me around anyway, he told Citra. Oh, boo-hoo, Citra said. Am I supposed to feel sorry for you? Scythe Faraday did bend his own rule once, however. About a month in, he allowed Citra to attend her aunt's wedding. While everyone else was dressed in gowns and tuxedos, Scythe Faraday did not allow Citra to dress up. Lest you feel yourself a part of that world. It worked. Wearing simple street clothes amid the pageantry made her feel even more the outsider, and the apprentice armband made it worse. Perhaps this was the reason Faraday allowed her to attend, to make it crystal clear the distinction between who she had been and who she was now. So, what's it like? Asked her cousin Amanda. Gleaning and stuff. Is it, gross? We're not allowed to talk about it, Citra told her, which was not true, but she had no interest in discussing gleaning like it was school gossip. She should have nurtured that conversation, however, instead of shutting it down, because Amanda was one of the few people who spoke to her. There were plenty of sideways glances and people talking about her when they thought she wasn't watching, but most everyone avoided her like she was carrying a mortal age disease. Perhaps if she already had her ring, they might try to curry favor in hopes of receiving immunity. But apparently, as an apprentice, she offered them nothing but the creeps. Her brother was standoffish, and even speaking to her mother was awkward. She asked standard questions like, "Are you eating? And are you getting enough sleep?" "I understand there's a boy living with you," her father said. "He has his own room and he's not interested in me at all," she told him, which she found oddly embarrassing to admit. Citra sat through the wedding ceremony, but excused herself when the reception took a public car back to Scythe Faraday's house, unable to bear another minute of it. "You're back early," Scythe Faraday commented when she returned, and although he feigned surprised, he had set her a plate for dinner. Scythes are supposed to have a keen appreciation of death, yet there are some things that are beyond even our comprehension. The woman I gleaned today asked me the oddest question. "Where do I go now?" she asked. "Well," I explained calmly, "your memories and life recordings are already stored in the Thunderhead, so it won't be lost. Your body is returned to the earth in a manner determined by your next of kin." "Yes, I know all that," she said, "but what about me?" The question perplexed me. "As I said, your memory construct will exist in the Thunderhead. Loved ones will be able to talk to it, and your construct will respond." "Yes," she said, getting a bit agitated, "but what about me?" I gleaned her then. Only after she was gone did I say, "I don't know." From the Gleaning Journal of Honorable Scythe Curie. Chapter 8. A Matter of Choice. "I will glean alone today," Scythe Faraday told Rowan and Citra one day in February, the second month of their apprenticeship. "While I am gone, I have a task for each of you." He took Citra into the weapons den. "You, Citra, shall polish each of my blades." She had been in the weapons den nearly every day for lessons, but to be there alone, nothing but her and instruments of death, was entirely different. The scythe went to the blade wall, which had everything from swords to switchblades. "Some are merely dusty, others tarnished. You shall decide what type of each care each one needs." She watched the way his eyes moved from one blade to another, lingering long enough, perhaps, to recall a memory. "You've used them all?" she asked. "Only about half of them, and even then for only one gleaning." He reached up and pulled a rapier from the fourth wall, the one for the older-looking weapons. This one looked like the kind the Three Musketeers might have used. "When I was young, I had much more of a flair for drama. I went to glean a man who fancied himself a fencer, so I challenged him to a duel." "And you won?" No, I lost. Twice. He skewered me in the neck the first time and tore my femoral artery the second. He was very good. Each time after I woke in the revival center, I returned to challenge him. His wins bought him time, but he was chosen to be gleaned, and I would not relent. Some scythes will change their minds, but that leads to compromise, and it favors the persuasive. I make my decisions firm. In the fourth bout, I pierced his heart with the tip of my blade. As he breathed his last, he thanked me for allowing him to die fighting. It was the only year in all my years as a scythe that I had been thanked for what I do. He sighed and put the rapier back in what Citra realized was a place of honor. If you have all these weapons, Why did you take our knife the day you came to glean my neighbor? Citra had to ask. The Scythe grinned. To gauge your reaction. I threw it away, she told him. I suspected as much, he said. But these you will polish. Then he left her there. When he was gone, Citra studied the weapons. She was not particularly morbid, but she found herself wanting to know which blades had been used, and how. It seemed to her that a noble weapon deserved to have its story passed down, and if not to her and Rowan, then to whom? She pulled a scimitar from the wall, a heavy beast that could decapitate you with a single swing. Had Scythe Faraday used it for a beheading? It was, in a way, his style. Swift, painless, efficient. As she moved it clumsily through the air, she wondered if she had the strength to behead someone. My God, what am I becoming? She put the weapon on the table, grabbed the rag, and rubbed polish on it. Then, when she finished, she went to the next, and the next, trying not to see her reflection in each of the gleaming blades. Rowan's task was not as visceral, but was even more troubling. Today you shall lay the groundwork for my next gleaning, Scythe Faraday told him, and then gave him a list of parameters that tomorrow's subject should have. All the information you need is in the Thunderhead, if you're clever enough to find it. Then he left for the day's gleaning. Rowan almost made the mistake of giving the list of parameters to the Thunderhead and asking it for a subject, until he remembered that asking the Thunderhead for assistance was strictly forbidden for Scythes. They had full access to the Great Cloud's wealth of information, but could not access its algorithmic conscious mind. Scythe Faraday had told them of a Scythe who tried to do so. The Thunderhead itself reported him to the High Blade, and he was severely disciplined. How is a Scythe disciplined? Rowan had asked. He was put to death 12-fold by a jury of Scythes, then revived each time. After the 12th revival, he was on probation for a year. Rowan imagined a jury of Scythes that would be very creative in their methods of punishment. He suspected that dying 12 times at the hands of Scythes would be a lot worse than splatting. He began to enter search parameters. He was instructed to have his search include not just their city, but all of Mid-America, when stretched nearly 1,000 miles across the middle of the continent. Then he narrowed the search to towns with populations under 10,000 and were also on the banks of rivers. Then to homes or apartments that were within 100 feet of the riverbank. Then he searched for people 20 and older who lived in those residencies. That gave him more than 40,000 people. He had done that in 5 minutes. The next few requirements were not going to be so easy to nail down. The subject must be a strong swimmer. He got a list of every high school and university in each river town, and cross-referenced everyone who had been on a swim team for the past 20 years or registered for a triathlon. About 800 people. The subject must be a dog lover. Using Scythe Faraday's access code, he found the subscription lists of every publication and blog dealing with dogs. He accessed pet store databases to get a list of anyone who made regular purchases for dog food over the past few years. That brought the number down to 112 names. The subject must have a history of heroism in a non-professional capacity. He painstakingly searched the words like rescue, hero, or bravery for all 112 names. He thought he'd be lucky if a single one came up, but to his surprise, 4 of them were noted as having done something heroic at some point in their lives. He clicked on each name and brought up 4 pictures. He immediately regretted it, because the moment those names had faces, they became people instead of parameters. A man with a round face and a winning smile. A woman who could have been anyone's mother. A guy with a bad case of bedhead, or a man who looked like he hadn't shaved in 3 days. 4 people. And Rowan was about to decide which one would die tomorrow. He immediately found himself leaning toward the unshaven man, but realized he was showing a bias. A person shouldn't be discriminated against because he hadn't shaved for a picture. And he was ruling out the woman just because she was a woman? Okay then, the guy with the smile. But Rowan was overcompensating now by choosing the most pleasant looking of them. He decided to learn more about each of them, using Faraday's access code to dig up more personal information than he really should have been allowed to. But this was a person's life he was dealing with. Shouldn't he use any means necessary to make his decision fair? This one had run into a burning building in his youth to save a family member. But this one has 3 young kids. But this one volunteers at an animal shelter. But this one's brother was gleaned just 2 years ago. He thought each fact would help him, but the more he came to know about each of them, the harder the decision became. He kept digging into their lives, getting more and more desperate, until the front door opened and Scythe Faraday returned. It was dark out. When had night fallen? The Scythe looked weary, and his robes were splattered with blood. "Today's gleaning was more trouble than expected," he said. Citra came out of the weapons den. "All blades are now polished to a perfect shine," she announced. Faraday gave her his nod of approval. Then he turned to Rowan, who still sat at the computer. "And who do we glean next?" I narrowed it down to 4. "And?" said the Scythe. "All 4 fit the profile." "And?" said the Scythe again. "Well, this one just got married, and this one just bought a house." "Pick one," said the Scythe. "And this one received a humanitarian award last year." "Pick one!" yelled the Scythe with a ferocity Rowan had never heard from the man. The very walls seemed to recoil from his voice. Rowan thought he might get a reprieve, as he had when Faraday asked him to hand the woman the cyanide pill. But no, today's test was very different. Rowan looked to Citra, who still stood in the doorway of the weapons den, frozen like a bystander in an accident. He was truly alone in this awful decision. Rowan looked to the screen, grimacing, and pointed to the man with bed hair. "Him," Rowan said. "Glean him." Rowan closed his eyes. He'd just condemned a man to death because he had a bad hair day. Then he felt Faraday put a firm hand on his shoulder. He thought he'd get reprimanded, but instead the Scythe said, "Well done." Rowan opened his eyes. "Thank you, sir." "Were this not the hardest thing you'd ever done, I'd be concerned." "Does it ever get easier?" Rowan asked. "I certainly hope not," the Scythe said. The following afternoon, Bradford Ziller returned from work to find a Scythe sitting in his living room. The Scythe stood up as Bradford entered. His instincts told him to turn and run, but before he did, a teenage boy with a green armband, who had been standing off to the side, closed the door behind him. He waited with increasing dread for the Scythe to speak, but instead the Scythe gestured to the boy, who cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Ziller, you have been chosen for gleaning." "Tell him the rest, Rowan," said the Scythe patiently. "I mean to say that I chose you for gleaning." Bradford looked between the two of them, suddenly deeply relieved, because this was clearly some sort of joke. "Okay, who the hell are you? Who put you up to this?" Then the Scythe held up his hand, showing the ring, and Bradford's spirits fell again like the second drop of a roller coaster. That was no fake. It was the real thing. "The boy is one of my apprentices," the Scythe said. "I'm sorry," said the boy. "It's not personal. You just fit a certain profile. Back in the Age of Mortality, lots of people died trying to perform rescues. A lot of them were people who jumped into flooded rivers to save their pets. Most of them were good swimmers, but that doesn't matter in a flood." "The dogs," thought Bradford. "That's right, the dogs." "You can't hurt me," he said. "You do, and my dogs will rip you to pieces." But where were they? Then a girl came out of his bedroom, wearing the same armband as the boy. "I sedated all 3, she said. "They'll be fine, but won't be bothering anyone anymore." There was blood on her arm. Not the dog's, but her own. They had bitten her. Good for them. "It's not personal," the boy said again. "I'm sorry." "One apology is enough," the Scythe told the boy, "especially when it's genuine." Bradford gawked, even though he knew this was real. He just somehow found this funny. His knees weak, he settled onto the sofa, and his laughter resolved into misery. How was this fair? How was any of this fair? But then the boy knelt before him, and when Bradford looked up, he caught the boy's gaze. It was as if he were looking into the eyes of a much older soul. "Listen to me, Mr. Ziller," the boy said. "I know you saved your sister from a fire when you were my age. I know how hard you struggled to save your marriage, and I know you think that your daughter doesn't love you, but she does." Bradford stared at him, incredulous. "How do you know all this?" The boy pursed his lips. "It's our job to know. Your gleaning won't change any of that. You lived a good life. Scythe Faraday is here to complete it for you." Bradford begged to make a phone call, pleaded for just one more day, but of course, those things were not granted. They said he could write a note, but he couldn't bring himself to find anything to write. "I know how that feels," the boy told him. "How will you do it?" he finally asked them. The Scythe responded, "I have chosen for you a traditional drowning. We shall take you to the river. I shall submerge you until your life leaves you." Bradford clenched his eyes. "I heard that drowning's a bad way to go." "Can I give him some of the stuff I gave to the dogs?" the girl asked. "Knock him out so that he'll already be unconscious?" The Scythe considered it and nodded. "If you choose, we can spare you the suffering." But Bradford shook his head, realizing he wanted every second he had left. "No. I want to be awake. If drowning was to be his last experience, then let him experience it." He could feel his heart beating faster, his body trembling with the surge of adrenaline. He was afraid, but fear meant he was still alive. "Come then," the Scythe told him gently. "We'll all go down to the river together." Citra was awed by how Rowan handled himself. Although he began a little shaky when he first spoke to the man, he took charge. He took his reins off the man's fear and gave him peace. Citra only hoped that when it came her turn to make a choice, she could keep her composure as well as Rowan had. All she had done today was tranquilize a few dogs. Sure, she got bit in the process, but it was nothing, really. She tried to convince herself Faraday had taken the dogs to a shelter, but he wouldn't have it. He did allow her to call the shelter to come for the dogs, and the coroner to come for the man. The Scythe offered to take her to the hospital for some speed healing of the dog bites on her arm, but she declined. Her own nanites would heal it by morning, and besides, there was something compelling about the discomfort. She owed it to the dead man to hurt a little for him. "That was impressive," she told Rowan on the long ride home. "Yeah, right until I puked on the riverbed." "But that was only after he was gleaned," Citra pointed out. "You gave that man strength to face death." Rowan shrugged. "I guess." Citra found it both maddening and endearing how modest he could be. "There's a poem by Honorable Scythe Socrates, one of the first Scythes. He wrote many poems, but this one has grown to be my personal favorite. Have not a hand in the blade with abandon. Cull from the fold all the brazen and bold. For a dog who just might love the bark and the bite is a carrion raven, the craven of old. It reminds me that in spite of our lofty ideals and the many safeguards to protect the Scythedom from corruption and depravity, we must always be vigilant, because power comes infected with the one disease left to us, the virus called human nature. I fear for us if all Scythes begin to love what they do." From the Gleaning Journal of Honorable Scythe Curie. To all those that can still hear, drink some water, have a very, very pleasant time zone, and get some sleep. And I will see you all in the next one. Good night.